Mrs. Fredrickson, and to this day I get kind of heart palpitations when I think about her because she was so profound. It wasn't her bulletin boards and her dresses that turned me on to life, but it was simple little everyday rituals that she did. And the most amazing thing, I was born and raised up outside Northern California, Saratoga, California, and I remember one thing: every single day of every single classroom, I knew where I'd find her. Every day she'd always stood at the door. And every day she greeted every one of us when we walked into the classroom. You learn character best through example, through modeling, and not the worksheet. And so my first question to you is, what are you modeling for your students to catch? Mrs. Fredrickson modeled heart, kindness, empathy. She stood at the door, and I always thought I was teacher's pet because she was waiting to find me, and it took me a while to realize she was looking for everybody else too. But as we walked in, we chose an H or an H. Do you want a hug or a handshake? Every day we walked in, I always knew Mrs. Fredrickson was there. Along the way, she also began to do something that was simple and profound that we now know kids aren't getting nearly enough from parents. She would take a moment to praise or acknowledge my character. Something I did the day before. She wasn't talking about how cute my shoes looked or what my pigtails looked like, and there's the hint. I'm the third one from the right with the pigtails in the middle row. That's me. But what she would praise instead was my character. Thank you, Michelle, yesterday for being so kind and opening that door for Johnny. Did you see the smile on his face? Thank you, Michelle, yesterday for finishing your work. That was tenacity. She just did simple little moments, and then I'd eavesdrop and notice she was doing the same thing with everybody else. How do you create a moral learning community? You start at the door. You start at the door by creating that tone for your students. Other things she did, every teacher who is a moral learning community mentor in life has a basic touchstone or a basic discipline policy. Here's the simple, most important thing we stand for in this class. Mrs. Fredrickson, it was H and H again. And we knew it within the first day of school, because anytime somebody did something wrong, she just turned it and used the H and H question. Was that helpful or hurtful? So how are you going to make it helpful? The fascinating thing, by the end of 2 weeks, every kid was turning to the other kid and go, was that helpful or hurtful? So yeah, I'm going to make it helpful. And the most amazing thing is we never forgot it. Because 25 years after I left this extraordinary teacher's room, I got into a stage like this with an alumni session. 9 of these kids showed up. We were all having an alumni session. We got our flashbulb went off, and there we were with our first grader. We moved up 25 years later, and then we started to recall first grade. And the number one thing we recalled was H and H. Was that helpful or hurtful? Now, that sounds simple, but that's the way you begin Character 101. Ask yourself, before you get into all the other activities we're going to be talking about, what's the simple, most important thing you want to be remembered for in June? Your kids are with you for a long time. If you could repeat one thing for just 10 seconds every day, what would it be? So your kids create and develop that mantra that they recall. Remember, the best way to teach character is through example. I'll give you 2 seconds. Just close your eyes and go, what do I want to be remembered for? Or do something really profound. I dare you. Give every one of your kids a 3x5 card tomorrow. Don't tell them to sign their name, but instead say, what's the single most important thing I stand for in this class? Collect the cards, read them. Is it what you want them to remember? That's how you begin a moral learning community, and then you can begin to implement character. Now, this one is by Tom Lacona, and I absolutely adore this man. But there are 11 principles that he say we can weave in to create moral learning communities. And I know you're already doing a lot of these, like using good children's literature selections, or conflict resolution, or cooperative learning. Maybe the first thing before we start character is just take a moment and say, what am I already doing? And then maybe you remember, many of you came as a school side. What are we already doing school-wide? Because you always optimize the chances of change with your kids if you get on board together. You may not get everybody on board together, but how about the teacher next door? Or how about the teachers in your hallway? I have worked with so many schools who have become national schools of character. And when I ask them how they got that way, they tell me it was a long journey. But it always began with understanding a solid why we believe that character matters. And then we take on one best practice a year and we keep taking it up and taking it up and taking it up. All I want you to do is if you like something I said, write it down. If you think of something better, then write that one down too. But you got to come out of here with 3 ideas you want to use. And we're going to start with what I think is the crucial thing for after the pandemic. We're finding in every country that I'm in, educators are saying the kids aren't quite as confident as they used to be. They're a little bit more risk averse. They don't know who they are. And if you want character to embed from the inside out, a child has to have a solid notion of what my strengths are. How can I contribute to my class? I'm the hall monitor. I had to. It was my duty. How extraordinary was that? But that internalized as his image. By the way, kids act. Watch this one. Listen. Kids act how they see themselves to be. Think about some of the students you're dealing with. Some of the reasons they're acting the way they're acting is that that's the image they have of themselves. But the power of an educator is you can create a different image, and that's what self-confidence is. So first of all, the why, because it's always critical. When we look at children later on, because I heard the principal of this school say, that's what kind of kid we want, a child who's later on going to go out and change the world. It's almost always the child who discovers their purpose. You go read Man's Search for Meaning. You read any book about children who really become that little change maker. And it doesn't mean we're all going to try to win, create Nobel Prize winners. But what we're discovering is about today's generations of kids worldwide is they've been kind of raised to be a test score or get the good grade, and they forget who they are and how they can contribute. When you look at children who are actually the happiest, by the way, university students, the number one time a university student says Harvard and Yale drops out of school is end of freshman year, first semester of college. They find out that the levels where they're at doesn't match who they are, and they have that low sense of purpose. So the first thing I want you to do is identify a child you're worried about. I know you're going to run out of room in your head, but just think of one. One student, you can always put in another on this side, but here I want you to do something for the next week or two. Watch the child a little carefully. What is his strength? May not be math, may not be science, may be something that has nothing to do with the curriculum, but if you tune in a little closer, and you're going to see a child who's engaged in their strength, they're a little more tenacious, they're a little more eager. They have a need level for, all of a sudden it's the art lesson and the kid's eyes light up, or it's music time and you can just see the kid just kind of relax a little more. There's a tone. They're eager for it. What research says is that you, teacher, are going to be far more likely to be successful as a teacher if you can engage in your strengths. Work your strengths into your lesson plans. Now you know what your strengths are. What are you going to do about it? Watch the child, because a lot of times they will disguise their strength and work hard for you not to understand it or see it. But if you keep tuning into it and watch the child, pretty soon, all of a sudden you'll discover it. And there's your moment to plant an image in that challenging child. What do you do? Let me just give you ideas. This was me. That would be the one on the left, how you change. But this is Special Education 101. Every one of these children has a severe learning disability, emotional problem. They're in my room because they are really challenged kids. And this is Northern California. But I want you to just take a moment, look at the photograph. Take a moment and ask yourself, which kid in that photo would I have been a little concerned about, worried about, and losing sleep over just based on the child's, look at it, demeanor, or posture, or eye contact. Look at the photo. Take a guess with the person next to you. Who do you think the kid is that I'm worried about most? I'm worried about them all, but there's one kid who's the telltale child. I am hearing you say it. How many of you guessed the kid standing right next to me? Put your hands up. There you go. All you need is your class photo. We've been 50,000 times on all the behaviors of the checklist. Look at the photo. Observe the child a little more. Look at his behavior, his posture. He's meek. He's weak. He's standing next to me, and he's looking at me next to me. I'm his strength. If I try to touch him, I get a knee-jerk reaction. Look at his demeanor. Look at his smile. This is not a child who is confident at all. Now, he's also struggling in that classroom. Take a moment to step into his shoes. What are you going to do? Here's what you do. You start walking around and be a little more intentional. Keep teaching, don't stop teaching. But tune into that child until you begin to see something he's actually legitimately good at. And one day I discover, lo and behold, geez, he's good at art. Now, if I walked up to him and said, Michael, you're so artistic, he will rip it up and never do it again the rest of his life, right? So be subtle and do the hit and run approach to counseling. That means you walk by and go, hey, that's a really nice job, Michael, and keep walking on. Keep subtly giving him ideas that you are on to his artistic ability or whatever the strength is until lo and behold, this takes a while. It never is overnight, but slowly you're going to open this child up and you're going to help him develop character from the inside out, not giving him trophies and stickers, but helping him develop and internalize the real image. All of a sudden, one day, he begins to draw and forgets to cover it up. And I had that moment to walk up and go, Michael, this is really artistic. Do you mind if I put it on the good work board? He said, yes. I put it on the good work board, and the moment changed of the whole paradigm in the classroom. He started to smile. 3 kids went up to the board, looked at it, and said, wow, Michael, you're really artistic. And Michael began to struggle less and began to be confident more. The change began to happen in how much more he began to focus in on what was so hard for him in the classroom, the work. Slowly, again, teacher, this is a slow process, but you got one other thing. When you find something the kid like that is good at, you got to pass it on to maybe the teacher next door, the parent, the principal. Pass it on. You lose them. They go on to the next class and the next class and the next class, and you will always wonder, I wonder what happened to that child. If you keep passing on to the other teachers like I did, just a subtle nothing more than, I want you to know what Michael's good at, what begins to happen is absolutely amazing because you just need one moment in your entire professional career, and it happened to me probably 20 years after he left my room. I got a letter from him. I was never expecting it, and I'd never heard from him before. And the letter just simply said, hi, Mrs. Borba. I wanted you to know I graduated from high school and I almost fell on the floor. I wasn't expecting it because he was struggling so much. But he said, I also want you to know I got a scholarship to college in art. And the most important thing, Mrs. Borba, I want you to know that I'm now doing what I always dreamed about doing. I'm an animator in a movie studio, all because you put my work on the good work board. Go figure. That is a rare moment. But your point is, take a moment to realize that you matter. That it starts with creating a moral learning community by you figuring out what you're going to do to help that child. There's some other little things you can do. Here's a biology teacher in high school. He does it by having each child have a 5x8 card, and he takes roll. He takes roll every day. He's got 150 kids, a different color set for each class period. But he said, by the end of the year, I want to know each child's strength, their learning style, what are they good at, and then I want to pass it on to next year's teacher. There's a fabulous idea. This one came from ASCD. Not for every child. You don't have time for every child. But how about the child who's struggling most and you want to rebuild that sense of who I am so that they can have that strong sense of character and begin to develop the rest of those skills? Maybe it's a 1 minute or a 30-second or a 10-second. Michael, I want you to know how good you are in art and pass it on. Or I want you to know I'm here for you. Some of your students are really struggling. They've gone through some real trauma. Not all of them, but a lot of them have. Maybe it's nothing more than a check-in every day. How are you doing? And that's what you can do to help them realize you're there and you're not giving up. Or do what all the research says. Catch the kid like Mrs. Fredrickson did. The moment they're engaged in character, legitimate character. Not all the time, but every once in a while. And you simply walk up and you name the character trait. That was kind, or that was empathetic, or that was respectful, or that was responsible, because this is what you did. We're finding, Harvard said, of a study of thousands of children across the U.S., that parents are not praising their character. They're asking what you get. What was your grade? Not how hard did you try or what your character is. You can do it. This is one of the best bulletin boards I've seen in one of the schools. What they're doing is catching the kid the moment they're engaged in the character strength, and their photos are, that's what we're proud of. What are you proud of? What's the one thing you want to do for confidence? I start with confidence because I think as character traits, many times children are risk adverse right now. They're afraid to do these other activities because in reality, they don't feel comfortable about who they are. Start there and you can weave your way up. You do the same thing if the child is, a junior in college or a first grader or a kindergartner. It's looking in and using your own empathy. And empathy is the second trait that I think is absolutely transformational and is absolutely crucial for today's children. We are looking at a nosedive in empathy levels in every single country in the world. We're looking at it because as stress builds, notice that stress is building. What happens legitimately is you need to dial your empathy down in order to survive and help your own stress levels go up. So in reality, what you're seeing is a lot of children who are struggling and their empathy is down, but empathy is what creates a moral learning community. Empathy is the base of it. And yeah, you can have Mrs. Fredrickson standing at the door. But the other thing I want you to think about is, who are your social influencers in your school? Your kids, your peers, the students. Use them as models of any character trait. When kids look up to that other child, not from a poster, but what their behavior is, it'll make a difference. Let me just share one idea, and let me introduce you to Josh Yates. Nova Scotia, Canada. Suffered from enormous depression. And then his dad gets a brain tumor, and his dad passes away. The depression is mounting because he'd been bullied unmercifully in middle school. But his dad's final comment to him is character-driven. Josh, don't ever stop being who you are. You are a kind-hearted kid, Josh. That's your identity. It's implanting in the child their identity, not from the outside, but from the inside out. Now, Josh's dad passes, and the depression mounts to the point where mom has to go on to another school and say, let's start all over again. It's a very large inner city school. And Josh says to me, I had to start anew. My dad's final words to me is, don't stop being who you are, because his dad had planted character in him. Here's who you are. That matched his confidence level. That matched who he was. Now what happens to Josh? He says, okay, so this is what I decided to do. I said, what? He decided I was no longer going to be invisible. I was going to stand at the front door of the high school every day and be the door monitor. I said, you're kidding. How'd that work? He said, well, not so well at the beginning, but I refused to give up on the kids. Maybe some of those kids didn't know how to be kind. So maybe what I needed to do was model it. What a brilliant idea. Every day he stood at the door, the front door, and said, hello, hi, how are you, to kids coming in. Did the change happen immediately? No, and that's what I got to tell you, teacher. It does not happen overnight. But begin to slowly see a change, and he saw it because other kids began to smile a little more. Other kids began to say hello a little more. Other kids, he said, Ms. Borba, some of the other kids decided to be door monitors in the other hallways. And then the principal said, I don't know what you're doing, Josh, but you're changing the whole school culture. It was becoming a moral learning culture. Kids were becoming the influencers. You have them at your school. Utilize them. And said, one day, Josh said, the principal said, months later, Josh coming down to the assembly just like this. The whole room was packed with kids. I walked in. I didn't know what to do or what to expect. But as soon as I walked in, every student stood up and started to applaud. And then the principal had me come up on the stage and said, Josh, we got a present for you because we wanted to thank you for turning the culture around in this school. What do you think the best present you could give that kid would be? The door. They took off the door, all the kids signed it and said, take it off to college, Josh, because you just gave us the best lesson there is. Now, my first question to you is, you want a more empathetic environment? You start with a tone. And what research says we don't do nearly enough is utilize kids. Who are the kids who can be starting with the little guys, the student greeters, the friendship greeters, who can stand at the door and help? Character is made up of skills and habits. We think of it as a definition, when in reality it's a verb. And if you break down, you want kids to be kind? Yeah, sure you want them to be kind. Don't just put, in this school, I want you to be kind. In this school, here's showing kids what kindness looks like. It starts with a smile. It starts with hello. It starts with what Josh was doing. And that's not the only thing. I'm going to keep taking you up a notch, and here's some other ideas. Feeling check-ins. The gateway to empathy. Being able to feel, how does she look? How does she feel? Wow, if I were her, what would I be doing? is emotional literacy. Today's digital generation of kids are looking down, not up. And what we're discovering is that in every country, by the way, Philippines, you are fourth in the world in terms of use of the internet. Congratulations. But your kids are looking down, not up as well. And every time I interview kids, they're telling me we can't read each other like we used to. Some teachers are putting up like feeling graphs, or on a scale of, some of you are dealing with some very, very challenging kids, on a scale of 0 to 7. How are you doing today? Doctors ask us to do that all the time. How bad's the pain? But you can do the same thing when the child is walking in. There's dozens of things you can do. Some other possibilities you can do. This is my favorite, and this is Dan Bean. He teaches 7th and 8th grade algebra. That's his story. Raymond Cree, and he says, everybody's always talking about kids and social emotional learning and all that stuff. He said, I thought it would be important for us to start tuning into each other. I have 3 boys. They've all had Mr. Bean for their teacher. But I remember when Zach came home from Mr. Bean's room and we said, how was algebra today? He said, oh my gosh, Mom, I've never been so scared my entire life. Why? He said, well, Mr. Bean had a red day. I said, what do you mean he had a red day? Well, you knew it was a red day because he had a red construction paper circle taped to the door. Usually he has green days, Mom. That's a green construction paper circle taped to the door. He's smiling, he's joking, his eyes are kind of bubbly. Sometimes he has yellow days. They're not too often, but every once in a while he has a yellow day and he just kind of doesn't look kind of happy. But today he looked absolutely terrible. Nobody said a thing the entire day, and we were so worried about him. And I went, this is the best discipline employee I've ever heard in my entire life. So I go to Dan Bean, I said, what the heck is this? And he said, I think it's time that we start connecting with each other. I have been using this for 25 years, Michelle. And I put the red thing up there because one day I legitimately had to let the kids know that my mom was really failing. And I had had a terrible night. I didn't tell anybody what it was, but there's always one kid that figures it out. And by the end of the week, or by the end of the day, there's this networking that kids start passing it on to each other. And pretty soon, kids start coming up to me, Alfred's having a yellow day, Mr. Bean. Or Johnny's really having a red day, Mr. Bean. And then I'll turn and say, so what are you going to do about it? It's our connector, kind of like Mrs. Fredrickson with the H&H. This is algebra, and this is 7th and 8th grade. It's a connector. He does it every single day. His whole of his class begins to connect and let each other know how they're feeling. He said, I've been teaching for 25 years, but never, ever do my kids come back and say, how you doing with that algebra lesson, Mr. B? And they always say, he had more red days. That's our connector. What are you doing? Other ideas, just so you know it. I think that one of the most important things that we can do, I don't care if the child is 3 or 42, is start regaining face-to-face communication. If we don't, I think we've lost empathy and we've lost really a civilization. We become very lonely. And Philippines, you're extraordinary as a culture with your friendliness, with your hellos, with your manners. Don't you ever lose that, because it breeds a moral learning community. My favorite thing, this is Greg Bingham, and this is high school AP. He said, I've got the same poster, and it's been laminated every day for the last 25 years. It stands on my wall. I love it because he teaches history, and he's brilliant at history. But he said kids need to learn to process. So pretty soon what I just simply do is I teach just like you teach. But when you begin to see there's a lull, kids' attention spans aren't as long. Notice that? They're not as focused as they used to be. So you got to take a break. But it doesn't have to be 5 hours. And you're not playing 5 hours of Play-Doh. Instead, it's just simply pencils down, eyes up front, turn to your partner. And here's the most important traits of face-to-face communication. It'll take a while to learn them, but the first thing is turn to your partner. Your partner is just the kid sitting next to you. In New Zealand, every kid has a partner, and they're switched every week. And it's just a desk that's really close to the other kid. And when you say, I don't have time to weave this in, this is 30 seconds. I've seen some teachers do this in 15 seconds. But if you keep doing it over and over again, you create a moral habit. That's brilliant. It's sitting square like this. Kids don't know how to sit square. Be open. Do not judge the other person and let them get to the period at the end of the sentence. No interrupting. Just be open and hear them out. L is listen and lean in just a little bit. Be eye to eye. Don't look down. Kids are not used to looking up. Look eye to eye. If you have a really shy kid, just tell them right here, look at the bridge of the kid's nose. What will happen is they'll start looking up again at each other. And finally, I love this one because this is what Greg Bingham does. What are they talking about? What's the single most important thing you just heard me say, or saw in the video, or read in the paragraph? It's probably going to be on the test tomorrow. Turn to your partner and repeat it. Now, your partner then switches roles and he repeats it back. That could be your brain break. How simple that is. And what we're finding is that you can go up a notch. Maybe try that. Here's another one that you may want to try. I love this one. This is just another class. What they do is they partner every kid up. They've been lonely. They've been really lonely with each other. But maybe the kid is absent, or maybe he can't remember what the homework assignment is. It's a learning buddy in your classroom, and it's the same learning buddy all week long. It could be start the day with how was your day, or what are you looking forward to yesterday. But it also can be if your partner is absent today or missed class today, then collect the assignment. And that kid who's absent no longer has an excuse. That kid has the assignment waiting for him. If you need something, call me up. You can also do the assignment check. You were there the whole day and you couldn't remember what the heck the assignment was. Or what's the most important thing? Was it on page 4 that was the homework assignment? It can be nothing more than, again, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, information gathering or problem solving. I love what this teacher does. Do not come to me with a problem. You must first ask your partner if they can solve the problem before you come to me. Solved it immediately. What I'm saying to you is that empathy is face-to-face. Empathy is nosediving. In America, we have discovered in 30 years, the empathy in American kids has gone down 40%, while narcissism has gone down 58%. We're looking at incoming college freshmen. The same thing is now happening in Finland, and the same thing is happening in China, which means it's happening everywhere around the world. Those are longitudinal studies. But we can do simple ways to weave it in. That's what I want you to do. There's some other things you can do. Many of you, for younger kids, are doing class meetings. And that's every day, sit on the floor and just turn and say, how was your day? Or what are you going to do? Or what are we going to look forward to doing tomorrow? That's the simple way to begin a moral learning community. You can also later on do Restitution 101 and Restorative Justice, but it starts with class meetings. And it doesn't have to be primary teachers any more than 5 minutes. Most teachers say when they're doing this, a responsive classroom changed their entire dynamics in the room. But other things. Okay, now let's go up a notch. Let's go up a notch and let's look at what research says is real simple. Martin Hoffman says that you parent or you teacher who asks your students, I don't care what the lesson is, when you're reading, To Kill a Mockingbird or The Outsiders or Harry Potter, how would you feel if that happened to you? What would you need? If you're a younger child, it's how would you feel and what would you need? But let's go up and now you're dealing with middle school, high school, university kids. And that is, particularly if you're in design thinking model, you're trying to get innovation and you're trying to get the kid to think outside the box and get into the shoes of the customer or the client. The question is, how does your customer feel? What do they need? And then as you get older, so what will you do? They have found that if you ask that teacher over and over again, what happens after a while, the child begins to internalize it. So when he's reading a book or when he's discussing history, or when he's looking at the science project, and you've said it enough, maybe that's your whole poster for the rest of your teaching career, feels plus needs. Keep weaving it in. The child begins to internalize it, and it starts to help him learn empathy. The key is not all these ideas, but just one or two. Here's a Romeo and Juliet test from a high school teacher. She read Romeo and Juliet, just like you do. But then she had each kid take the test. It was a multiple choice test, just like you give. But then she had each child come up to the front of the room for a 15-second extender of the test. She's got 4 different shoes cut out from construction paper, just construction paper. They look like shoes. And there's 4 different characters. The child then has to step on each character. How would I feel if that happened to me if I were Romeo? How did I feel if I were Juliet? How would I feel if I were that set of relatives or that set of relatives? I've seen the same thing done with very young kids, and it could be any kind of a book, but real shoes with post-it notes on it. What we've discovered is empathy starts with getting into the shoes of somebody else, but you have to think big, but start small. That's a simple idea. Other ideas, history. I love this one. This is a history teacher who had the kids go through the history book. Before you take your test, find one moment in your entire history book that's a moment in time that you wish you'd been there. One kid chooses Martin Luther King's March on Washington, I Have a Dream speech, because he'd studied it. So now he makes a PowerPoint presentation of just the slide of him, Martin Luther King, doing the speech. But what does the child do, and what does each kid do? They step into time. I am Martin Luther King. I am in Washington, D.C. I am giving the I Have a Dream speech, and this is how I feel. See, it activates it. Some kids are ready to be activated. But if some children are at that level that it's lower, their stress is big, then you've got to start with simpler things. This is my favorite, health and science. Here you go. This is Grand Rapids up at Grand Central High School, Northern Lights. This is Alberta. The teacher realized the kids had not a clue what poverty and hunger deprivation felt like. So to help the kids understand it, he said, let's do a 24-hour famine with your parents' blessing. Come all in together. For 24 hours, you're going to feel what hunger feels like. And at the end of 24 hours together, every kid wanted to get into a service project and do for others because now they understood it. What are you doing to help activate empathy so your children really understand it for that level? There's so many things you can do. That's one of them. Let's keep going with some other ones. Take a moment, would you please, and ask yourself, what can you want to do in order to make a difference on your students' lives? Talk. Could you forward to the next slide, please? Thanks. English teacher, where are you? English teacher, take anything, but write from the first person instead of the third person point of view. There's another idea. It's an autobiography. You studied it. You're doing a memoir, but not, this is the story of Dwight D. Eisenhower. No, I am Dwight D. Eisenhower, and this is what I felt. Oh, this is my favorite one. Discipline. Discipline. It's one piece of paper. You write it over there on your side. You write over there what you think happened. Then we're going to put the two sides together, and what's the different view? Empathy is feeling from the other point of view. Our children need to be stretched so they understand it. It is the moral side of character. There's two sides to character. One is the moral side, so the child has the heart part. The other is the performance side, so they have the stretching ability and they keep focused in on the academic task. Put the two together and it's a win-win-win, and that's where we're going. The final thing is, I warn you, teachers, we are seeing a nosedive in children's reading for pleasure. And reading for pleasure, moral imagination, stepping into the shoes of the character, is one of the most profound ways to not only help kids learn to stretch their focusing ability, but get into the shoes of the character, and that's empathy. Are your children reading rich books? Maybe you choose a character theme a month. I don't care what it is. Maybe you choose your particular subject area and have kids read memoirs or individuals at that particular point. But the more we can get kids to stretch themselves and get into the shoes of somebody besides themselves, we've made a profound difference. There's a lot of ideas. We've talked about a lot of ideas, and I didn't want to flood you with 50,000. Instead, I wanted you to think about the one that you wanted to do, that you think will work for you, that you can adapt. Ones that your students will look forward to, that if you do it enough, character becomes a habit, and they'll be able to do it without you. Pick up your pencil, write down one thing, and let's go to the next one in life, and that's called self-control. We're working now on not just heart, but also mind. And self-control is a huge piece to it. We find that as children's stress levels go up, noticing that? Have you noticed that your kids' focusing abilities have kind of dwindled? Anybody seen that? Okay. Who has noticed that your students' focusing abilities is a little shorter? How about yours? Yep. It's happening to us all. But there's some points that I think are critical based on research from 50,000 years ago, because self-control is a critical character strength. And like every other character strength, it's stretchable and it's teachable. And probably the best study ever, I bet you remember from your old Edside days 50,000 years ago, it was the marshmallow test by Walter Mischel. Remember, the kid was 4. And remember, they put the marshmallow in front of hundreds of kids, and they said, if you can wait until I come back without eating that marshmallow, I'll give you another marshmallow. What they discovered is some kids would gobble them up instantly. Some kids had a very tough time waiting. But then what Walter Mischel did, and here's the point of how this addresses you, is that he followed the kids up from 4 to 15, 16, 17, 18. And he discovered that those kids who could wait and not eat the marshmallow did far more successfully in high school, college, they're still following them up, and in the job market as well. Here's the problem. We all thought, and so did Walter Mischel, that focusing abilities were just innate. And now all of a sudden he realized that when he tracked the kids who didn't eat the marshmallow, the reason they didn't eat the marshmallow was because somebody had taught them how to wait. Our kids are in instant gratification. I want it now, and the parent gives it to them now. They don't wait, and as a result, they don't have the skills to wait. There goes their character. Because when impulsivity comes in and you can't put the brakes on your impulses, you barrel straight ahead, and very often you do the wrong thing. So let's look at what you can do in your classroom for kids who don't have that regulation abilities. What do we know that research says will help? Number 1 is stick to what you already do. Stick to your routines. Stick to your rituals. Write on the board. I don't care if there's 19 or 5. This is what we're going to do first, second, third, fourth. When unpredictability happens in the world, stress builds. But if you know what the structure is in a classroom, or what am I going to do at home, or here's how I'm going to do my homework first, second, third, fourth, it actually reduces your stress. You can't change the outside world, but you can change, here's the predictability in the classroom. The first thing is, keep doing what you're doing, stick to the rituals and the routines. The second thing is use what Mary Bud Rose says from way back when. This is so profound and so simple. Notice that some of your kids, when you ask them a question, I don't know. I don't know. And they don't answer. Mary Bud Rose found something really profound that we do wrong. Not you, but the person sitting next to you. We don't pause and wait enough for the kid to think it through. If we waited, the average teacher waits about 30 seconds and figures the kid doesn't know. But if we wait a little longer for the kid to process it, particularly if they're stressed, what actually happens is the kid who would have said nothing will say a word. The kid who wouldn't have said, says a word will say a sentence. And the kid who says the sentence will say a dissertation. So the first thing in today's stressed out world, give kids a little more time to process and wait, but you can also do some other things. For the upper grade kids, tell them to write the word or write the sentence, or for little kids, draw your response. And we're looking at this because Yale is finding this of freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors. They're more risk adverse. In fact, Yale says, watch out, guys. You are raising excellent sheep. That's what he terms them. They're very, very smart. Some of the population of kids have never been smarter, but they're afraid to think outside the box, and they don't have the skill sets of character, and so, as a result, it doesn't work. Timers for little kids. Just do it as long as the sand timer runs out. For bigger kids, they found if you have a mediator, write down your tasks. We've been doing that for years on those agendas. Get the kid to do it, but put them in order. First, I'm going to do this, and this. That actually helps the child's stress go down, and they're more likely to do the task. So there's one idea. Brain breaks are critical. Don't do them all the time. But when you say, what do I do for a brain break and why? Because it recharges your executive function ability, so you're more likely to be able to think, process, and concentrate. You've got to say to yourself, maybe if you're dealing with 5-year-olds, it's every 20 minutes or every 5 minutes, whatever it is. For Greg Bingham, he uses think, pair, share, or turn to your partner and say one thing you just heard. And that's enough to just process it out. And that could be a critical idea. I love this one. It's a way to build character in, and it's a simple strategy. So you ready? Let's go all together now. Every week, what this teacher does, let's just say it's fourth grade, fifth grade, you can do it at every grade level. She comes up with a quote based on the virtues she wants to teach that month. So maybe it's all quotes that are simple and memorable for age appropriate, for maybe for third grade or for ninth graders or whatever. And she puts the quote on her blackboard every day. Okay, she's ready. Now what does she do? She says it at the beginning of her class meeting. Here's the quote about kindness this week. Here's that kindness quote. And then she stops and she says, she uses it for brain break. The kids are just doing a great job. They're doing their work, and all of a sudden she noticed their attention span's getting a little shorter. She just says, pencils down, eyes up front. Let's do all together now. The kids say the quote, but they do it about 5 times a day. By the end of the week, the class has memorized the quote. The fascinating thing is what that teacher, Deb Brown, is trying to do is get kids to memorize quotes about character and then write down the single most important quotes that will serve as your mantras that you can use the rest of your life. That is so profound. They have discovered that those individuals who have those mantras, when push comes to shove, they'll be able to say something. It could be a prayer. It could be the mantra. It could be the quote. But right now, a lot of kids don't have anything in their head, and that could be the strategy that you're using. Look a moment, just one other thing. Think about the kid who is the most stressed, the most challenging in your classroom. Not all of them. But if you watch that child, you'll begin to see right when he starts to melt down. Because he'll do the same thing every single time. For some kids, their little feet go like this. For other kids, their hands go like this. Other ones, I don't care if they're 5 or again, or they're 19. You will see the same thing when they're really to the level they can't do it anymore. Teacher, you've got some kids, you don't know what's going on in your homes. Trauma has hit a lot of our children, and their body signs are critical. When you're going, so what do I do about it? That's your preparation to be aware that a meltdown is coming in. For some kids, you can say, you have what I've seen with a lot of you with elementary, you become buddies with the teacher next door. 2 teachers use a white stapler for each of their classrooms. If the kid walks in with a white stapler, the kid thinks he's walking in to ask you for more staples, when in reality, it's your ploy. If he's walking in with a white stapler, would you just take him for 3 minutes, please, so I can just recharge myself? What they discovered is that there's simple little things you can do to make a difference in your children's lives. Other ideas, sir, you've got these already, but these are just things that many schools are doing across the country and across the world to help kids tune into how you're doing today. The other thing is target one thing. Let me just give you one strategy for self-control. If you're a building administrator, sit up, because this is going to change your moral learning community. This is a school. It's called Visitation Valley Middle School outside San Francisco. It's a very high-risk school site, and it is high risk in terms of violence as well. The kids were having a tough time focusing. The kids were having a tough time showing up. The kids' behavior was off the charts in the walls until you got together as a staff and you said, I think they're doing the best they can do. But they don't know another way. They don't know another way. Character is made up of habits. Are you teaching your kids a healthy strategy to reduce the current behavior problem? What's the replacer they can do? Do your students know how to reduce stress before it mounts? Because at that point, they're going to be off the chart. So what they did instead is they said, let's just teach them 1-2 breathing. The fastest way to calm down is take a slow deep breath from deep in your abdomen. We know this by working with Navy SEALs. Hold it up here. Now slowly let it out. But your exhale is twice as long as your inhale. You're looking at me like, really? Yeah, really. Now, do it for 3 minutes a day. What the school decided to do is they realized half the teachers were doing it, half the teachers weren't. But what if we took 30 seconds off of each class and we put 3 minutes where every kid in the entire school would do slow, deep breathing just to recharge when they walked in. And that's how we start the day. We turn off the lights, we put on some music, no class time is lost because it's just 30 seconds from every single class for the whole day. And what happens? The kids can just veg. The third kid's sleeping for the first time in his life. But what began to happen is they saw something that was remarkable. Teacher, behavior problems went down. Attendance went up. Suspensions went down. Test scores went through the roof. The test scores went so high, and nothing else was done than quiet time once a day. That every school in Oakland, California is now requiring 3 minutes a day of quiet time. Does that cost any money? No. It's simply finding a strategy to replace the challenging behaviors. There's a lot of things you can do for little kids. It's belly breathing. Maybe it's 1 plus 3 plus 10. 1 when I start to feel get upset. 3 is when I take slow deep breaths. 10 is count slowly to 10. But moral learning communities don't just do this in the first grade, or don't just do this in sophomore. They do it so that every single teacher is doing the same thing. What are you doing to help your children manage stress and learn to cope in a healthy way? Let's keep going. Because the next thing is Integrity 101. You want your children to have integrity. By the way, you're going, why didn't you